Welcome to the Nashoba Regional School Committee's budget workshop. So I'm going to call the meeting to order. And if Steve would be so kind, do you have your flag, Steve? Everyone can mute, stand if you choose to, and pledge along with us. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. So our agenda is pretty straightforward today. Kirk is going to be our guide and walk us through his budget overview presentation. And so, Kirk, I will turn it over to you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a multi-device technology setup in here today, so you probably see me twice. One's labeled presentation, the other is just my name, so I am working off of my camera there. So welcome, thank you for having me. Before I begin the presentation, I just want to express to the committee, thank you. This is for me, and as my team knows, I had a very exciting week as I was running in and out of their offices all week long to make sure we're buttoning down all the right things. Because as a superintendent in his first year, this is really one of those seminal marks in the school year of doing first pass at the budget. And so in that, I just want to really express the obvious that you all are very familiar with, is that this is only a first pass. And the concept of bringing this budget forward is taking in a level service way what we're currently delivering in the school system and expressing to you what the straight cost of that would be. And we know that many of the variables have not been determined yet. So when you see the numbers, I don't want you to be overly alarmed if they seem large or the gaps seem large. This is a natural part of the sausage making, if you will, that goes into building a budget. So I know that's not the prettiest of analogies, but sometimes it feels like an accurate analogy for how we craft our budgets. So this overview today is just to give you a comprehensive look of how we've gone through the steps of the budget, and it will include some changes in the budget process that I've brought in that addresses some of the things that we talked about both in the vetting process of my candidacy and since then. So in that way, I think we'll begin. So I will share my presentation screen. Very good.
As Kirk is getting ready to present, I just want to remind you that I might not be able to see you all. So if your hand is up for too long, just feel free to jump in.
And Dr. McGuire and I have a very friendly wager that we can do this work, my friends, in 2 hours and give ourselves the 11 o'clock sunset for the presentation. So we are going to be tight in the presentation of our slides. And I would just ask that you hold your question to the end of each section, and then we'll take some questions in that section. Okay. So to begin, I would like to introduce the members of my team, and frankly, I would like them to introduce themselves, both as you all know our team, but this is a presentation and a recording that I would love for our public to view, and I would love them to meet our folks. So I will introduce myself first as Kirk Downing, your Superintendent of Schools.
Dr. Todd McGuire, Assistant Superintendent of Schools.
Pat Maroney, Director of Business and Operations.
Mr. Frieswick, I know you're out there.
I believe he's having some tech difficulties.
So we'll meet Mr. Frieswick when we come to facilities later on. He is our Director of Facilities. Ms. DeAngelis.
Director of Pupil Personnel Services.
Hi, everybody. Suchi, Technology Manager.
Lisa Gilbicki, Coordinator of Health and Wellness.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Anne Marie Stoica, the Director of Human Resources.
Okay. So for our budget meeting today, we're going to be looking at really two pieces, and I want you to think about this presentation today in two ways. The first being, to really get down into the budget, I need to lift what I was preparing for the entry presentation that is coming on March 23rd, and that is the enrollment analysis across all the towns. It is so pertinent to how we craft the budget and how we think about the future staffing needs of our schools. I'm lifting that from my entry findings and inserting this here at the beginning of the presentation. And I promise, while there are 40 slides in this, we are not going to spend an exorbitant amount of time on it. What I would ask is that for the representatives of each of their town, they look at those slides as their data sets, and we can develop and have more conversations about sort of the depth and understanding of what those are in future meetings. And I can come back to school committee and explain that as well. But I am going to show you some data that you can find on DESE ourselves and how we can look at some of the trends that we've seen in the school system. So think of that first 20 minutes as sort of a pre-entry report findings of enrollment over time. And then we get into the budget in earnest with our drivers and revenue, E&D and assessments, and then going through our departments. And at that point, I'll be able to explain some things that we've done in changing how we craft our non-salary budgets and look at some of the staffing changes we're looking at next year, as well as looking at how we use grant funding to fund activities in the district. Okay, there we go. I'm having a technology issue at the moment. Okay. So what we're going to look at here in this change of enrollment over time is a couple of different things. What our school enrollment looks like, that means the students that walk in the door of one of our schools every morning. And then students attending school somewhere in our individual towns and collectively as a district, no matter if they go to NRSD or another school system. So this first report that you see is the historical enrollment of NRSD. And what I would like to show for the committee is that there's some links on here for the public to click on, and you can click on them yourselves. And as you look at these links, at the top, this takes you to a publicly posted page I've created for our school system that includes all the data sets that you're going to see in this presentation. But embedded in that is the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education link to where you can pull these enrollment numbers yourself. So I am illustrating that. So if anyone out in our system felt the need to look at those numbers themselves, they're welcome to do so. But when we look at enrollment, we're looking at the October 1st date. And this report that I'm talking about is posted as the enrollment by grade report. The enrollment by grade report is drawn from the SIMS data that is collected October 1st on a myriad of data points across the district. This report, however, only expresses the total number of students attending an NRSD regardless of where the student lives. And it's done by grade level. So it includes the students who live outside of NRSD and attend our schools on school of choice vouchers. We'll talk a little bit more about school of choice vouchers later on when Ms. Maroney speaks about slides 59 and 60. So when we look at our enrollment here, you can see it's expressed across the grade levels. And I would like you to notice the columns to the right. The K to 12 totals are expressed in this first column. The next column, the K to 12 year over year, that's to show what is the delta between the total enrollment of the previous year and this current year. So if you look, FY11 is 3,385, FY12 is 3,393. That's a delta of a positive 8, and so on and so forth. So the next column is called the change in cohort. And I examined When a cohort comes in at kindergarten, so for instance, the kindergarten class of FY01 came in at 222 students, and I shaded these grays so you can follow your eye. When that class graduated as seniors, it was 240 students. So that cohort grew by a delta of 18 students from move-ins and move-outs over the course of their 13 years in the school system. And expressing what those cohorts have looked like over the last 10 years. That gives us a sense of, over time, are our cohorts growing? Are they shrinking? Are they staying level? So you can see over a period of time they were growing. In our most recent years, the most recent cohorts, they've been shrinking by 10, 15, 14 students. I will, in all of these data sets, express a little bit of caution to the committee in looking at school enrollment in the FY21 school year for obvious reasons. That was the year of remote and hybrid learning at that October 1st date. So if you move down the columns, I've done that expression as well for the pre-K to 22 students in our school system, the year over year for that by levels. And then I also wanted to express what's the change in our preschool numbers. Because I think it's important to note when we're crafting the budget, our students in preschool and our students who are also post-graduation to 22, those numbers can be variable. And for our preschools, they're also subsidized through some tuition costs as well. So I've sort of isolated those two groups in these data sets to help us sort of dig into and find some stories about changing enrollment in our school system. So the next slide expresses what happens when those students go to the next grade level. So this is the changes year over year. So that kindergarten class that I showed you in FY01, when they went to grade 1 in FY02, they grew by 23 students. And so on and so forth through the chart. So this gives us a sense of where do we grow in the course of K to 12? And where do we decline in the case K to 12? And so another really fascinating column is what is the factor of entering kindergarten and exiting seniors? And I have that expressed in a graph later. But I think to look at this chart and determine that like this is the trend wouldn't be an accurate way to do that. So I was able to craft these numbers to create a 5-year rolling average of those grade level changes. And that sort of flattens the curves at each grade level and each data point to give us a sense of what is the trend. So this graph is pretty telling that in these early years, our students, our grade levels, as a rule of thumb, are growing across their elementary years into their middle school years. And look at what happens grade 8th to 9th. And we know that this is the vocational tech effect of our students going to Minuteman and just a handful going to Aggie as well. So particularly over the rolling average of the last 5 years is showing a significant number there. We'll get more into that when we get into the school attending. So as we look at this, we'll express this in some bar graphs. Here's our K to 12 enrollment. I've separated out pre-K and up to 22s in these numbers to give us a sense of the grade level enrollment within our doors. So you can see over the past 7 years, we have been declining in enrollment in the school system as a whole. When we look at our kindergarten enrollment, I think it's interesting to note that in the past decade, our numbers have been on average 20 to 30 lower than the previous decade, meaning less students are entering our school system at kindergarten. And you might be asking yourself why. I'm going to get to that when we get to school attending. Here's our graduating seniors number. We're graduating the biggest classes in the history of the Nashoba Regional School District. So when you lay over the graduating seniors with, oh, come on, technology. the kindergarten enrollment, you get this graph here. So you can see going back to FY12, the number of kindergartners entering our system has been less than the seniors graduating and exiting our system. The decade prior to that, when we had smaller graduation classes and larger kindergarten classes coming in, it was the opposite, and we were growing kindergarten to graduating seniors. And that's a significant impact. I will say an important factor in this is the school of choice factor. Currently, we have school of choice students remaining in grades 8 through 12, and we have not been accepting those school of choice students in the school system for 8 school years now. So here's a graph of that K to 5 enrollment. You can see the middle school enrollment here as remaining somewhat flat over the last few years. And then you can see the 9 to 12 enrollment declining as those large graduating classes leave us. Smaller graduating cohorts are coming in behind them, and we have students leaving us for vocational education. So now I'm going to come to what we call the school attending report by town. And again, the data sets and the tabs in those data sets provide you direct links to the reports in this presentation. This is a different type of report. It is not a report of the kids that walk in the doors of Nashoba. This is a report by individual towns, kids that are ages 5 to 18 that attend school, whether it's public, private, homeschool, charter, collaborative, whatever you have there. So we've been digging deep into these numbers, and currently we're studying deeply the added district number, and I have calls out to several of my colleagues to get an understanding of this. Out of district predominantly is our school choice students, and looking at these special education placements as well. However, what we need to investigate is, in terms of DESE's October 1 foundation enrollment, are these special education placements to be included under out of district or in the flat regional number, because there are students getting services in another location, but through the auspices of our team and the mechanisms of the school system. So I'll bring a little more clarity to that. We have some calls out to DESE and with some of my superintendent colleagues and data colleagues in other districts. So as we look into these numbers, excuse me, these are how the reports are expressed. You can see coming across the top, this is the number of students that attend NRSD Regional School District. The next column is vocational and tech, which is overwhelmingly Minuteman with a couple of students in Norfolk Aggie. Students that attended collaboratives historically, charter, out of district students, and these are school of choice students, homeschool, in-state private, out of state private. So the census work that's being done right now by Kathy Leonardi in our data office for FY22 is happening right now. And these numbers will be submitted to DESE by mid-February. And we hope to get certification on those numbers sometime in March. So that's why this table is only expressed up to FY21, because this year's data on those numbers is not certified and confirmed as we talk to potential private schools and other school systems about our school students that are attending. You can imagine when it comes to in-state private students, it can be tricky trying to find students that are in other systems. We can do that once we identify them, and then we have some markers to go back to those systems. But it can be tricky if a family doesn't notify us. What that all comes together when you add them up is look at the total in town number. That's the census of students eligible for full-time school between the ages of 5 and 18. Essentially, kindergarten to 12th grade. I did this for all 3 of our towns and aggregated the data for the entire school district. So these straight literal numbers you will not find in the state reports. I had to put that together. On the right, you will see the percentages of which each of those categories is to the total census of school-age children 5 to 18. So expressed this way, in FY21, 86.79% of school-age children in the towns of Bolton, Stowe, and Lancaster attended the Nashoba Regional School District. And so on and so forth through those columns. So what does that look like for us? Here's the census data for Bolton, Lancaster, Stowe combined over time. Excuse me. Here's the enrollment in NRSD over time. I think this is interesting because the participation rate in NRSD over the last decade has been fairly consistent, with slightly less participation the last 2 years. Well, we know in FY20, that was the opening of Minuteman High School and drew quite a bit of attention. Here it's expressed in a pie graph, so you can understand proportionally what those numbers look like. And then if you look at the small pieces of the pie, I've gathered that together in this data set expressed in FY20, so you can understand the proportions of each section. So you can see in FY20 in the school district, 177 students out in our 3 towns went to in-state private, 48 went to homeschool. It's interesting to note what happened in the year of remote and hybrid learning in FY21. That homeschool number went up 108, and look, the private school number came down 127. So as we look at these numbers over time, you could look at them for all 3 of the towns. So I won't spend time in these data charts at the moment. Rather, I will express, just make some general points here. First general point, when you look at the town of Bolton and you look at the total in town, it's remained relatively level over the past decade with some slight changes in percentages. So here's what the census in Bolton looks like over time. Their school attending in NRSD over time has been consistent. As we look at that proportionally, in-state private and homeschool, watch that number again as we advance forward to the year of hybrid and remote learning. So when I have certified numbers for FY22, I will come back to the school committee to present those numbers as well. So for the purpose of the budget presentation, I'm not going to go specifically through all the detail in all 3 towns. I want to give the committee some time to study these numbers and follow up with me as we dig in to understand these more. But I wanted to put it out there publicly because it does have some budget implications. So as we look at the town of Lancaster, you can see there has been a general decline in the census of Lancaster, with that census number stabilizing the last 3 years. The school attending enrollment in Nashoba Regional is interesting. In Lancaster, it has remained flat over time, with where we see that little dip in the last 2 years of more students attending Minuteman. We go into the next pie charts, as you see. You'll see the same effect. And this is what I want to express and show some interest, because I think there have been some questions around how the assessment is derived. And the assessment is derived, and Ms. Maroney will be getting into this in more detail later in the presentation, on October 1 data, not January 1 school attending data. I can't make that more clear. And those numbers are going to be slightly different because of move-in and move-out scenarios that happen between October 1st and January 1st. For instance, at Mary Rowlandson Elementary, there are 12 more students at Mary Rowlandson today than there were on October 1st. However, by the charter, our business office has to go in and identify those students at the October 1st data point to build the foundation budget and determine assessment percentages. Ms. Maroney, again, we'll talk about that more later, but the aggregate of those should be the regional school system plus students that attend collaboratives, charters, and out of district, because we have a financial responsibility in the school system for those 4 columns. We don't add the vocational tech numbers because those are handled by the towns individually in separate warrant articles. So if you look at the town of Stowe, look at their census over the last 7 years. That's a significant drop compared to the other 2 towns. And then when you look at their participation rate, they've had a pretty significant drop in participation rate in the last 2 years, coinciding with the opening of Minuteman Regional Technical High School. I can tell you, having looked at the preliminary numbers, that students from Nashoba Regional School District that attend Minuteman, the town of Stowe sends more students to Minuteman this year than any of the 3 towns. They are sending 58 students this year. The town of Lancaster is sending 54. The town of Bolton is sending 24. So again, I will come back to the school committee to report on those numbers. So you can see that in terms of assessment, there's been some questions about declining assessment numbers for the town of Stowe the past couple of years. That's the compounding effect of census numbers, declining participation in terms of the portion of the assessment that they're paying in the total assessment. So here's the school attending census in Stowe, participation in Stowe, and like the other towns, expressed proportionally. So with that description, I will entertain questions from the committee regarding that portion of the presentation.
Thank you, Kirk. What questions might you have? Kirk, really quickly while they're thinking, when you said that, for example, in Stowe, there are going to be approximately 54 students going to Minuteman, is that 9 through 12?
That's 9 through 12, yes.
Got it. So it's
And
not just from the 8th grade.
That's right. It's 58 total students attending Minuteman this year.
And my understanding is that Minuteman is now at capacity, and therefore
Right.
we might actually see fewer of our kids go as they need to
Yes.
balance enrollment across the 16 towns.
I've had that conversation with the superintendent there. Yes, but I can't provide you documentation to that effect.
That's fine. Okay. All right. So Joe, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Just to the superintendent very quickly, he spent a lot of time talking about student population over the district. And I just had a quick question, other than for edification purposes, what is the significance of the number of students, as far as your presentation is concerned? What is the significant number of students that attend in-state or out-of-state private schools in regards to our budget?
Yep.
Is it not just this number of students that we have accounted for as of October 1st that is important to our budget? Is there any significance to the number of students that attend in-state or out-of-state private schools?
Attorney Gleason, there is zero effect on the school budget. It is expressed in the school attending report to give school districts and citizens an understanding of changes in enrollment relative to eligible population through the census. So we need to gather those numbers in order to have an accurate annual census of school attending children every year.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Mike.
I believe Ms. Cohen is first, so I yield my time to Ms. Cohen.
Wow, thank you, Mr. Horish. My question has to do with the participation rate as a measure of, is that something that that we should be aiming to increase? And the other part of that is 86% participation rate, how's that like compare in your experience to other districts' participation rates?
Yeah, those participation rates in the school system are healthy participation rates when you look at the total participation in the school system. When you look at the three towns, and I'm welcome, I'd be happy to come back and get into more depth with this in another meeting. But when you look at the three towns, we have higher participation percentages in Bolton and Stowe than in Lancaster, because Lancaster has, while Lancaster right now has 54 students in Minuteman, their participation rate is actually higher because they have a lower census than Stowe does at Minuteman. So those are all relative metrics. And so when I look at that it is a healthy participation rate. I can tell you from my time in Natick doing this, I know that system very well. Our participation rates were 86 to 88%.
Mike.
Okay, I'm sorry. I'm about to transition from laptop Zoom to phone Zoom. So hopefully this transition goes well. First of all, I do just want to say, if I could make a blanket out of all this data, I would wrap myself up in it and spend the entire winter underneath it. Thank you so much for doing this. That's the first thing. The second thing is that it's clear that enrollment is sort of the centerpiece of your budget. This is the first thing that you delivered. It's obviously what you feel is the most telling component. And so I guess my question is, if I'm looking at the school attending census for Stowe as compared to Bolton and Lancaster, Stowe has been dropping more or less consistently for about the past 6 years. And the assessments for Stowe has also been low. And I know that you're drawing a correlation between those two. Am I correct in saying that?
Yes, there's a capitalization effect that happens with when you have declining census and then declining participation upon that. Don't think of it as straight dollar impact to the budget. Think of it in terms of proportionality of which Stowe is then obligated in the assessment calculations.
Okay, so the only thing that sort of popped in my head is that there's been a declining town census for Stowe of school-age children for the past 6 years, but the Stowe assessment has only been, I think, in the negative for like maybe 2 or 3 of those years. So it's not a direct correlation. So can you just share what other factors get pulled into explaining that assessment for all 3 towns?
Well, this is the wisdom of the regional agreement in having a 5-year rolling average, because that 5-year rolling average essentially buffers drastic swings like that. So those numbers you might have seen 4 or 5, 6 years ago are averaged in with the previous 5 years. So you're not going to see the declines to the same effect or degree that you might see in just a straight 1-year decline.
Got it. Okay, great. Thank you again for this data.
Yes. And in the interest of time, I'd like to stay on this page for just a couple more minutes so we can get to the bulk of talking budget. And like I said, I'm happy to reappear before the school committee in more depth on this section.
Kirk, if you don't mind, I feel like Rich might have a quick question.
Yep.
It's really just a compliment. I like Mike, I have to spend a good amount of time with this data, but great job. I guess the thing I really want to point out that I thought was effective in this presentation was the use of data visualization. It makes it so much easier to see those trends rather than tabularized data. So bravo to you and your team. Great presentation.
Thank you.
All right, seems like we're ready to move on.
All right, Madam Chair, thank you very much. It's at this point in time, I want us to, so file that away as sort of a pre-entry presentation, but it informs us as we get into the budget. So as we talk about the FY23 school budget workshop, I would like to turn it over to Patricia Maroney, our business and operations manager, to pick it up from here. So Pat, it's all yours, and I'll do my best to steer the ship.
Thank you and good morning. I'm going to start today with the budget drivers. This is a page that you've seen year after year in our budget workbook. As you can see, the budget that we're bringing forward right now has a 7.27% increase. And there are many areas within the budget that, you know, are showing some significant increase. We have a combined salaries and insurance of $51 million. Our total budget is $63,419,000. We have broken the $60 million threshold that we sort of stayed under for a couple of years. 81% of that budget is for salaries and insurance. We have some reductions in costs in special education, and Mr. DeAngelis will go over some of the reasoning in regards to that and some of the changes in her budget. A lot of it has to do with out-of-district enrollment and, you know, the number of students in that situation, and the fact that we've brought a lot of kids back into the district in programs that she has created. Transportation is another big driver in this budget. We have increased costs for both regular and special ed of almost 19%. It's a huge number. This is will be the first year of a new contract for transportation. And that in itself for regular transportation is up 13.87%.
Excuse me. My computer disconnected, just one moment.
And I can still continue to talk about this. One of the things, we had a 5% increase in special ed, but you have to keep in mind that we're continuing to fund the bulk of special ed transportation with the SPED IDEA grant. Facilities, as you'll see on a later slide, and Rob Frieswick will go over some of the things that are in his budget. It's up a little more than 13%. And like I said, he will go over the details for that increase. Utilities, significant increase in my perspective. And a lot of it has to do with fuel cost increase. Included in this budget are allotments for OPEB, OPEB of $50,000, and also $100,000 is allocated for the track and field stabilization. And it's important that we have at least that amount this year, if not more, if it was at all possible, because the next big expenditure for that track and field will be coming up and we need to plan for that. This past year, we did some renovations to that field, but that was just step one in the continued maintenance of that field. Next slide, please. I'm not seeing the slide, Kirk.
I have it here, Kirk, if you want me to share it. Oh, you're muted. Sorry, I muted you. There it is.
Okay. For those of you who prefer to look at things in visually, here's a pie chart that breaks out all of the costs across the district. Again, you can see the salaries and insurance and benefits, the biggest nut to crack in this budget. Next slide, please. What are we waiting for? We're waiting to negotiate contractual increases for units A and B, A and C. We have an estimated increase in insurance and benefits right now. From what I understand, I should be getting those rates probably the end of next week. We have a new regular transportation contract, and there may or may not be some changes to the number that we have there, hopefully to the good. And charter and school choice assessments, we're still waiting for state numbers, both revenue and assessment. The next slide, please.
And if I could just take a moment to express, Ms. Maroney, these are big factors. So when we look at the bottom line budget number, that's why we say this is a process that's going to play out over the next 6 weeks as these numbers come in. So we have to go with the most conservative numbers and use our baseline numbers from last year, knowing that things are going to be higher than that. But this is where we have to begin.
Does anybody have any questions in regards to anything that I've put forward at this point? Because I'm going to move on to revenue.
I don't see any hands.
Okay.
Oh, I do see Amy's.
Oh.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I just had two questions. The OPEB, did you say there's 50,000 included?
Yes.
What line item would that be coming out of? In the salary, would that be in the salary line item? Or
It's the very last line in that.
stipends and department funds?
Yes.
And what's our overall OPEB liability? Like, do you have that number
I
handy?
don't
Or?
have that number with me right now. It's
Okay.
actually we're waiting for new numbers. They should be out pretty soon because
Okay.
the last valuation is just up. So I should have that before we go to vote the budget, and I'll give you that information.
Okay, and thank you. My second question had to do with the salary increases is showing almost a 9% change.
Right, and 9%, first of all, there is a COLA in there. We opted to put a number into the budget so that we could actually give a true idea of what the possibilities are here. And there's also lane changes for teachers. So it's not like a raw number, a certain percentage, because there's also a number of lane changes, when teachers take additional courses and then they move up a step in
Ms.
their
Cohen,
place.
we have to start by putting that placeholder in there so that we can be in negotiations in good faith with our Teachers Association. So, we have to watch that play out while we enter those negotiations.
Okay, I understand. It just struck me as high. Okay, thank you.
Just to add on to that, Kirk, there are also some additional personnel requests in the budget, aren't there, that add to that?
There are not, but I will talk about that later on.
Okay, good. Steve?
Yes, I was going to say that at this point, there is only a budget hold place for potential union negotiations, and that's it's just right now it's kind of a guess, and we'll have to see what actually happens. If you think it's an expensive number now, wait till after the contract is negotiated.
Thanks.
So I'll move on.
Yeah.
This is the revenue for the district, the proposed revenue for this year, for fiscal year 23. And right now, the town assessments are irrelevant in this document because we don't have all of the state information, all of the numbers for Chapter 70. So this will just kind of give you an idea. We've level funded anything that we can kind of anticipate in advance. So as you can see, Chapter 70 is level funded, and Medicaid revenue and E&D appropriation, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a few minutes. Next slide. This is the trend for Chapter 70. As I said, we level funded it right now. We're hoping that it's a little bit more than that. You can see that the difference between fiscal year 21 and fiscal year 22 shows the increase that we got because we are starting to receive funding for the full day kindergarten instead of the 0.5 student in kindergarten. So again, that played out, the numbers worked out just as I had anticipated in prior years, and we are getting full funding for those students now. And this is the historical use of E&D over the years as a revenue source. Again, we haven't come up with a number for 2023 yet. We're looking at the other funding comes in, because we want to make sure that we keep our E&D at a healthy level. And you'll see that in the next slide. What I've done is I've put some numbers together here, letting you know what we've actually certified in E&D over the years and what is actually allowable by Mass General Law. So you can see at this point that we're significantly, we're not anywhere near the maximum 5% allowed. Then that would be 5% of the upcoming budget. Next slide, please. Now we'll move on to the local assessment. This is one of the pages in the workbook that you have. The minimum local contribution is determined by the state. These figures aren't in yet. It's a fixed portion of the assessment. And right now we leveled to fiscal year 22. That's why I said that the assessment numbers in the first revenue page are irrelevant, because we're not using up-to-date numbers. Next slide, please. In the assessment breakdown, the process here is to take the proposed budget, we back out the high school debt and the local revenue. And the local revenue is Chapter 70, regional transportation and Medicaid. And we come out with the total amount assessed. And again, like I said, these numbers will change. And we come up with
My fault.
okay. So we back out the fixed assessment, which is the total of the minimum local contribution, and we come up with a variable assessment. And that's what the 25,711,000. Now, again, I'm moving on to enrollment here. And as far as the assessment, I think it's really important to understand what our preliminary enrollment looks like. We will not have the final numbers, like Kirk says, probably until beginning of March or sometime in March. This is what we have for this year. And you can see that at the subtotal, that's our October 1 enrollment numbers. And you can see that if a student lives in one town but is attending school in another, it's all accounted for in the distribution of enrollment across the 3 towns.
So
And also,
if I can just bring everybody back to the school attending report from earlier, the way you would read the top line for center school here is that 4 of the students that attend center school live in Bolton, 3 live in Lancaster, 499 live in Stowe. And so then when you go vertically down those numbers, you add those columns by town together, along with your out of district special education, your school choice, and students attending charter. And that's how you come up with this year's enrollment number. And then that enrollment number is put into the 5-year aggregate. So I just want to connect it back to the report from earlier.
and here is the 5-year rolling foundation enrollment. And you can see those numbers and the percentages for each town. And also the high school enrollment for capital assessment. And that's that 547, I think it is, thousand. And that's how we would break out that number across the 3 towns based on the enrollment of students from each of their towns. Next slide, please.
And Ms. Maroney, if I can just make a point here, as we continue to just verify these numbers, it will have a very, I believe, small impact, if any at all, in terms of the percentage chairs. But if you'll just take your eyes to the operating assessment numbers for the towns of Bolton, Lancaster, and Stowe, you can see what the change of proportion is relative to those data sets from FY23 to FY22. And I think those are numbers that are important for people to understand. So if I just want to express them out loud as a matter of record, in Bolton, at this point in time, we would be assessing at a 0.15 decrease relative to last year. In Lancaster, a 0.08 increase relative to last year and a 0.7 increase in Stowe relative to last year's number.
And here's a breakdown of the actual assessment calculation. You can see the first column has the percentages. The fixed assessment is our minimum local contribution for each town. The variable assessment is applying the percentage to the remaining to be assessed. And then the debt assessment, the 544,000 that I talked about, it's allocated based on enrollment at the high school for each town. And you have your total assessment. And right now, you can see that the increases are very high without the updated state numbers. I also want.
Pat, do you mind if I interrupt you really quickly? I think Mike has a question.
Oh, sure, Mike.
Yes, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes.
Oh my gosh, I love technology. Okay, so I'm on slide number 57, Pat, and I'm looking at the operating assessment for Bolton, Langford, and Stowe. And I see that Bolton, forgive me if I'm being a little bit provincial with my question here, but I see that Bolton's a number. In other words, regardless of where the budget lands, the assessment for Bolton will drop by 0.15%.
Mike, you're
Mr.
breaking.
Haresh, I think I have the essence of your question, and so I'll take the I'll answer that here. Is Mr. Haresh, I wouldn't put that percentage in cement today, but I'm very confident that in these percentages today, we just need to just do a couple of verifications for some added district placements to make sure that that number is cemented. But these do look like the percentage changes, yes.
I think Amy might want to follow up on that.
Yeah, because
thank you.
Sorry, Mike, were you done?
Yes, I'm afraid of breaking up, so go ahead.
Yeah, you are. Okay. Yeah, I was going to ask something along the same lines because that is just a decrease in the enrollment portion of how Bolton is assessed, but that doesn't mean that our overall assessment is going to decrease by that percentage. Is that correct?
No. Ms. Cohen, I can't thank you enough for making that point. All that decrease expresses is what is the change in proportion that Bolton is obligated to the budget relative to the whole pie that is going to be the increase in the budget.
And that would be the percentage that's going to be applied to the variable portion. If you had an increase in minimum local contribution, then your overall assessment could still go up. We don't know that yet.
So those are for folks that have used the term the wealth factor out there, the fixed assessment, that is the ability to pay that is in Mass General Law. We have not been afforded that yet, but we're hoping that the state budgets are moving through and we're going to get those numbers in early February is where we're crossing our fingers. All right, Ms. Maroney, we were on school of choice, I believe.
Yeah, school choice. I put up the slide so that you could see our revenue stream. School choice is not, school choice revenue that we receive for students coming in is not a revenue stream for our budget. It by law, it has to be kept in a revolving fund. And typically over the last, I would say 7 or 8 years, we've used that as an offset to health insurance for active employees. In the budget process, what I would normally do is just reduce it by whatever the amount of revenue that we're anticipating. So that's part of our budget right now. And the next slide.
Ms. Maroney, if I can interject for a moment, I would like to just put a pin in this slide for us to return to a school system and discuss later in the year, most likely in April agenda, when we have to take an annual vote to close school choice as required by Mass General Law. And I would just like the committee to just put a pin in this and take note. Our actuals for paying out school choice, of which the preponderance of those students that live in NRSD attend Clinton schools. The balance of that line has been tracking to $500,000 a year. And so if you look at students going out of our system versus students coming into our system for school choice, well, you can see that delta is in FY26 is going to be the total enrollment that we are paying out to other school systems. So I just ask you to put a pin in your mind on that as we return to that question later on in the school year.
And this is another slide that shows the number of students in the, actually everybody that's in school choice right now is at the high school. So you can see the dropping enrollment.
Okay, so we are going to get into our departments next. So we'll take a pause right now and field any remaining questions from the committee for Ms. Maroney relative to the omnibus elements of the budget.
Any questions? I have a very quick, maybe mundane question. I noticed in the budget workbook that the school choice line item says 0. So you don't account for it as a revenue at all, just as a marker?
No, at one point way back we had been, and we were told that it should not be part. This was like way back. So I've kept that in there. I probably should remove it to, you know, eliminate any confusion, but by law, that revenue has to be kept in a revolving fund.
But aren't all revolving funds in the budget?
No. The revolving funds that we spend money from typically, or that have impact on the budget, are budgeted in this budget book. So in other words, if we had a revolving account, say gifts at any one of the schools, we wouldn't put that up there. Does that make sense?
I guess so. I just wonder, like with schools that accept school choice and they have an income stream on that of $1.5 million, and sometimes they spend that on operational things.
Correct.
Even though ours is small, we don't account for it anywhere in the revenue chart.
No, we don't, but we do. I do have a page in the budget, and it's called Revenue Grants and Revolving Offsets. And it details if we're taking any money from any one of the revolving grants. I think it's, let me see what page it is. It's right after the executive summary and line item controls. There's a page, it's called Direct Charge of Expenditure to Revolving and Grants. And what they require that I do is directly spend money, like in our case, we use it to offset active employee health insurance. I would expend a piece of one of the bills, one of the monthly bills against that.
Okay. I'm sorry, Pat, to belabor this, but was that from the forensic audit that they?
Oh, no, this goes back years.
So it's just kind of a best practice to do it that way.
Well, no, it's mandated
by law.
That we do by law.
Okay, thank you. Steve?
Yeah, is this school choice issue a netted out figure between what we get and what we pay out?
No, it is not.
So what we pay out, or this number that you're showing us now, is basically what we receive or what we pay out?
This is what we receive.
Okay, where do we see what we pay out? Because in reality, I would think it would be a net number.
On the very first page of the executive summary, if you go almost to the bottom of page 1, about 2 lines up, you can see the assessment. I have estimated that at 500,000 right now because I don't have the numbers from the state.
Okay.
Thanks, Pat. Anyone else? Mary?
I'd just like to make a general comment and point out, first of all, how I do want to compliment Kirk and everyone involved in this for the amount of data that we have. But I think a question that often comes up from our towns is, why can't we have all of this information earlier? Because it would help us so much to be able to figure our revenue. And so why can't we have it earlier? And so I just want everyone to think about how many times we've heard that this is an estimated number because we don't have the numbers yet from the state, and how many, and these are huge pockets and huge aspects of the budget. So just in general, just thinking back and a school committee goes back over this, there are places that have to be estimated because the numbers aren't there yet. So our district has done a terrific job on this, but this is part of the answer to our towns, why we can't do everything earlier. This is about as early as we can put together, and a lot of this is estimated. Thank you, Mary.
All right. Thanks, Pat.
Thank you.
All right, Madam Chair, should we move into the nursing department now?
Sounds good.
All right, Ms. Gubecki.
Thank you for having me here today. So the nursing budget always is pretty flat most of the time. We do not see increases and decreases very often. So our salaries remain the same. The nursing staff remains at 9.5 full-time employees. We do have a resource nurse that is a 0.6, 3 days a week, through a grant that we've received through Department of Public Health. And this year, thank goodness, we have a routine COVID screening checks and COVID support nurse for full-time with the ERSA funds, which allows us to do the pool testing and also follow up with reflex testing as we have to do on a daily basis. Contracted services increased a little bit. This happens every other year with the Emerson Youth Risk Behavior Service survey. And this is our year for that increase. And then our nursing supplies and equipment, we decreased a little bit. However, we maintained our AED purchases line pretty robust because we need to replace AEDs that are out of date throughout the district. And we're doing that on a slow basis, and we'll continue that over the next 4 years. And then nursing professional development is remaining the same. It's $150 per school, and we're keeping that as the same for professional development for nurses. Any questions?
So I want to use this as an opportunity to go back up to the number one item here, the resource nurse at 0.6 and the COVID screening checks nurse at 1.0 are not part of the 9.5 FTEs. They are 100% paid by one-time grants. So
Yes.
those two positions are for this year only. And so we have 9.5 expressed in the FY22 budget, and it will be 9.5 in the FY23 budget. Later on, we'll have some discussions about ESSER 3 in the presentation. So before we go next, any questions on nursing? Madam Chair, I don't have a view of you, so if you could just cue me.
You are good to go. No question.
All right, so let's go into facilities. Mr. Frieswick has been having some technical difficulties. Mr. Frieswick, are you here? He is subject to the perils of a hotspot at the moment. Okay, so I do know this section well, so I can speak to it. The big increases that you're seeing here in the budgets, one is a product of our economy, and that is the rising cost of heating fuel. And so you can see it expressed as the contracted prices here. And then scheduled maintenance projects that are coming up in terms of parking lot repairs, Emerson fuel storage. building envelope repairs and small scale flooring projects around the district, it is the nature of the 32.5% increase. Any questions on facilities?
Seeing none.
Okay, I would like to give it to Ms. DeAngelis at this time.
Good morning. Thanks for having me today. I just wanted to review the entitlement grants that were afforded. I have given you all the projected numbers for FY22 because none of the allocations for 23 are out. We probably will not get those till this summer. So the first grant is the Individual with Disabilities Education Act Federal Special Education Entitlement. It's called the 240 grant, which is $847,060. That's where we pay for our in-district and out-of-district transportation. There is a small line item that supplements in the budget because we can't use, we don't have enough money in the grant to cover all of those costs, but it covers the majority of it. We pay for contracted services such as vision services, audiological services under that line, and then supplies and travel for our professionals. This year we had one-time funds, the American Rescue Grant 252 of $178,523. We've been told these are just this year's funds, but I wanted to make you aware that it's allowed us to hire additional social workers in the district. We felt like that was a really important component coming out of the pandemic. In terms of the preschool, there are 4 grants. The 298 grant is a professional development grant, which is $2,412. The 262 early childhood special ed entitlement grant covers part of a salary for an instructional assistant in one of our intensive preschools, $25,263. Our 237 community partnership grant, which funds our early childhood coordinator at $45,701. That's part of her salary. And again, the American Rescue Grant Early Childhood allowed us to provide social emotional services, and they awarded us $15,883. So that's the overview of the grants in special ed.
So at this point, any questions for Ms. DeAngelis?
I do see Karen's hand. Go ahead, Karen.
Thank you. And I apologize if this is the wrong spot to ask this question, but I was curious about the 34.24% decrease in special education. It was mentioned you were going to come back to that. I don't know if this is the right time. I'm just curious to hear more about that because that's pretty significant.
Sure, I'd be happy to address that. Every year, I have to prepare a budget for out-of-district placement. So this coming year, we're expecting 4 students to graduate that are in out-of-district placements. We have 1 student that's aging out and 1 that's aging out during the year. And we have 1 student that is returning to the district. So that is where the savings is from. We've also had a student move in that I've had to account for as well. So that's where the reductions are.
Thank you.
I see Mary's hand.
So I'd like to point out something, and this is kudos to Joan and her team, that all of these grants, some of them say entitlement. So that means you're entitled to it. However, that doesn't mean that there isn't a very elaborate, detailed, grant application that you have to submit, and it has to be approved. So between the entitlement grants, and then some of these are competitive, this is a tremendous amount of work. And the savings to our special education budget are significant due to these grants. So when people see entitlement, you might think, oh, good, you're just entitled to that. But as somebody who has worked with grants, both entitlement grants as well as competitive grants, it is a tremendous amount of work. And you see it in the numbers here. And I just wanted to point out that to people, that this is a real accomplishment.
Thanks, Mary. I have a quick question, Joan. I'm noticing that these are the FY22 numbers. You're anticipating them to be the same, or I'm sorry if you already said this.
They have been pretty stable. The 240 grant changes over time. We've seen decreases over the past 5 years. Sometimes we've seen a $20,000 decrease, and then sometimes we're surprised by a $40,000 increase. So it's really a moving target, and it's hard to predict. So I try to use stable numbers across time to account for what I pay for in that grant.
And you said that we don't sometimes know these numbers until the summer. And so you would have to kind of, if there are decreases, we'll have to find another way to fill that gap.
So Pat and I really work hard together. I think obviously the $847,000 grant and the 240 is the one that we target the most closely. So that's why there's a line for transportation in the regular budget, because if that grant was significantly reduced, we need to have a backup plan. So we do have money in the regular budget that would account for that.
Great, thanks, Joan.
You're welcome.
All right, seeing no other hands, maybe we move on.
I'd like to introduce Mr. Suchi to talk about technology.
Hi, everybody. There are 5 parts in the tech budget. The first one is contracted services. The major part in this one is the internet connection. We use Comcast fiber for both internet and also the internal connections. We have 7 buildings. The connection between them is all linked via Comcast fiber, same as Comcast internet connection. Then also on top of that is the firewalls, antivirus, and also some IT consultant, when we work with third parties. So the second part is professional development. That is just the ongoing training for the IT team, hardware, software trainings. So the third line is computer supplies. This one is purely based on the student number. So we allocate about $9 per student for consumable items like tuners for printers, and the projector props, the cables, USB drives, all that kind of things. So if you see like increase, decrease, mostly caused by the student number change. The fourth item is a big piece is hardware. You see a big increase here, mostly caused by the chipset shortage. As everybody knows, everything is hard to get. On average, all the code we got is almost 20% increase on average. And also on top of that, there's some big increase caused by the one-to-one deployment. In the past years, we have one-to-one Chromebooks, new deployment for the 6th grade and 9th grade. And this year, actually during the pandemic, we kind of extended that one to the 3rd grade. So we have another 2 grade, one-to-one. So that's also cost increase. Also in this, some larger costs is we have aging smart board setup, projector setup in all schools. So every time we replace those, the cost is pretty big. So the last one is the computer software. There's 3 big categories in that. One is the first one is the school operation. Those are the software we use to actually for the school daily operation, the hosting our public website, school messenger to communicate with the so every time Kirk send out a message to you guys, to the parents, we use a school messenger. The Power School for student information. We have Teach Point for teacher evaluation. Of course, on top of that is the Google apps for all this Google online, the docs and Microsoft license, all that stuff. Next one is a business operation. That's how we run the internal finance, accounting software, the HR software. And the last one, of course, is a tech operation, how we manage the internal network, the online activity, that is a big piece, especially since the pandemic, this just kind of monitor student online activities, just keep them safe, if something happens, there's a warning, we will reach out to local principals and then they can contact the parents. And also the backup stuff, the internal and also online backups. So that's kind of overall of the tech budget.
Any questions for Mr. Suchi?
Mike.
Thank you, Suchi. remember when the Chromebook initiative came out a few years ago, there was concern amongst the school committee at the time that we would have difficulties potentially funding the Evergreen initiative, which hardware needs. Have we been in that initiative long enough to know whether we are able to safely manage those upkeep needs, or have we not reached that point? And if we have reached that point, are we doing a good job? I mean, does it seem like we are managing that okay?
Yes, I would say like there kind of a shift on the technology usage. Like when we go with this one-to-one deployment, at the same time, we see some decline on the computer lab purchase and a lot of other areas, both hardware and software. So I think overall, in the long term, is kind of balanced off itself. This year is a big increase because we expand to the third grade, and that actually, was kind of balanced out by some state grant we got. So I think overall, we're in a pretty good place.
Thanks, Chi. Let's go over to Amy.
Thank you. I think my question might be along the same lines as Mike. I'm not familiar with what he's referring to when he says the Evergreen initiative, but my question had to do with Chromebook, the Chromebook one-to-one initiative also, and what kind of money we allocate in the budget to ensuring that students are able to keep their Chromebooks kind of current. Like if we're giving Chromebooks to students in sixth grade, do we plan for a replacement when they get to high school so that they're not using a device that's, outdated by the time they're juniors?
Of course, that is kind of the biggest, factor in the plan. So the way we do it is going forward, like a third grade student will get a brand new Chromebooks. So they will use the same Chromebooks in their elementary year. So when they get to sixth grade, they will leave the Chromebook at school. Actually, we collect that, we kind of clean up everything, use those Chromebook as loaners. Then when they go to the sixth grade, they get a brand new. So once they use, through their middle school year, they get high school and ninth grade, they get another brand new. So every time, they go to a different level, they get a brand new one. And at the same time, we collecting their old one and clean up, use as spare parts, use as loaner device. So this is kind of a pretty healthy setup now.
And Ms. Cohen, if I could jump on top of that as well, the experience with the one-to-one is different through the years. Our students in grades 3 through 5, you can think of it, the Chromebook isn't necessarily just specifically as designed to the student, but we have a ratio of 1-to-1 with those devices because students do not take home those devices in those grades. They're taking home the devices at sixth grade. So they get assigned their new machine at that point in time. They have it through their middle school years, and then a new machine when they're a freshman, and they have it through their high school years.
Okay, thank you.
Steve.
Yes, I know at one point, Suchi, that you were concerned about the bandwidth at the high school and the availability, especially as we kind of moved into remote teaching. Has that issue been resolved yet, or have we been able
absolutely.
to?
So right now, for the internet bandwidth, definitely we do not have concern on that anymore. In the past 2 years, you guys all know, like there are so many state, federal fundings to help school. So we get a pretty good deal with Comcast. We have plenty of bandwidth for high school now. That of course benefit everybody. But I do want make everybody aware. There's two pieces in this. The internet bandwidth is only one piece, but actually there's a lot of the I wouldn't say a lot. So another issue could impact people's connection is the Wi-Fi access point. It seems that way, just like, a big highway, 495, you have plenty, multiple lines. But in order for you to get on 495, you have to go through 117. So that 117 is that kind of like the access point. So that is kind of, could cause issue if there are too many people all connect to a small area. So like, those are the things, it's kind of, there's a, for each answer your question, for bandwidth, we do not have concerns. But, on the daily operation, if things happen, there could be caused by, the access point. So, but overall, I think we're very good.
Great. Sean?
Just real quick, Suchi or Kirk, we know that a lot of the equipment was sort of surplus over the last couple of years as far as auctioned off and that sort of thing. Where does that sort of fall into? Does it go back into sort of the general fund, or does it go back into the technology money?
Ms. Maroney, where is decommissioned technology that is then auctioned go?
I can answer that if so for all the old equipment, like no matter it's a laptop, desktop, also also the Chromebooks, we have a municipal bid. There's a public website. All the public schools, municipal, like they can auction all that off. So normally we put every time we put our stuff up there for auction, and if there are people wants it, they pay us. They take it away. If not, we actually work with a recycle company in the state. They will come grab our stuff. The good thing about this company is they will certify the destruction of all the hard drives. Meaning they remove all the labels from the machine. Nobody can trace everything back to us, and also they take out the drive, they physically destroy it and give us certificate for that.
So I think the specifics of the question is, when they go to auction, where do the funds then go from those? Where do the proceeds go, Ms. Maroney?
They go into miscellaneous revenue, and that's by Mass General Law, because it's revenue. If we got a refund for something in a given year, we could put it back against the account it was spent from. But where things were purchased in prior fiscal years, the law tells us that we have to put it into miscellaneous revenue. So that's where that money goes.
Okay, so we would see that elsewhere in the budget as far as other line items such as computers, or?
Nope, you would see that in our revenue stream in the general budget.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Great.
Can I ask? Yeah, just quickly, how much is that money? I mean, it can't be a ton of money, right? Obsolete equipment that we auction off?
Not much. For example, every time, like it depends on what we try to sell. Like we kind of stay away from the iPad. In the past couple of years, the last time we sell the old iPad, I think we get about like $2-3 grand back. And for the Chromebook, same. It's range from like couple hundred to couple grand.
Mr. Eckel, we could bring that to the Budget and Warrant Committee.
Thanks, Kirk. Seeing no more hands.
At this point, I would like to turn it over to Ms. Tanya Rich. Excuse me. I don't think Ms. Rich is here today. As you know, being athletic director, she's very busy. So I'm going to take her slides for her today. In terms of the mascot updates in the line of her budget, because I know there needed to be some discussions on that. You can see this year she presented on some of the work that they're doing in replacing some of the mascot changes. And for FY23, the rebranding costs above the uniform replacement cycle, you can see the stadium field, the tennis, and the update to replace the indoor track and records boards is coming out $1,200, $2,400, and $3,500 respectively. And we will continue in our established uniform replacement cycle to be as a responsible methodology for the rebranding effort. So any questions on athletics there? Great. I'll turn to Ms. Maroney for a quick talking point to food service.
Thank you. Food service this year, we're expecting expenditures of $1,171,000 and revenue at about $1.574983, and that we're anticipating that that we will not have full reimbursement at this point for all school lunches. Right now, every student in the district can receive a lunch, and we get reimbursed for that. We're not sure about participation, what participation will be in the event that we have to start paying for lunches. So what we've done is we've taken a fairly conservative approach on the revenue, and hopefully we'll have some more guidance from the federal government on this program by the end of the year. But again, this year we're doing very well. So we anticipate that we'll have a surplus that should cover any deficits that we may experience in the following year if participation goes down.
Thank you.
I see Mike's hand.
Thank you. Pat, hopefully this question is not too esoteric, but I'm on page 57 of the FY23 budget, the draft for the budget. It looks like meal receipts in FY22 were budgeted for almost $1 million, and we're down to $30,000. And I'm all but certain this has to do with the pandemic and the funding. But is there any way you can explain why there's such a sharp drop in sales from one budget to the next?
Hold on, I'm getting to that. I have a printed out copy here in front of me, so.
Sorry, I know I'm in the weeds with this question.
In terms of, and you're speaking towards the actuals, Mr. Hurst, is that correct?
Well, again, this is page 57 for Pat, but the FY22 voted, right? That's in the current budget was $850,000, and the proposed for this year, the requested is only $30,000. I'm just wondering why that drop off is so stark. I mean, the reimbursement is much higher, but I know that comes from federal funding, but I don't know if that's connected to sales as well.
Well, what we're experiencing right now is 100% reimbursement. I don't know what else I can say is except that in the event that kids, if we have to start charging money for lunches, then we anticipate the revenue stream to go down. So we only get reimbursed for lunches that we actually sell or that are given to a student. In the case where we get full reimbursement, the student still has to take the lunch. Is that what you're looking for? I'm not quite sure.
Pat, I can follow up later. I apologize. I know I'm asking you to toggle back and forth between two different documents. Let me just ask that later so I don't take up the committee's time. Thank you, though.
Okay.
Thank you, Ms. Maroney. And would you like to speak to extended day?
An extended day here. These are the anticipated expenses and revenues: $741,000 and $761,000 for revenues. Right now, enrollment is fluctuating due to the COVID restrictions and social distancing limitations. And we seem to have a greater need for one-to-one staffing, especially for some of the younger participants in the program. But I can tell you that the program remains self-sustaining, and we would like to grow the program a little bit more next year and hopefully bring more kids in. We have a lot of plans, and we're just hoping that this pandemic will cooperate and let us get back to some sort of normal after-school program.
Extended day questions? Okay. At this point, I would like to bring in Dr. McGuire to talk about the teaching and learning department.
So forgive me, Superintendent, if I'm a little long-winded here, because I might want to pull ahead in our little friendly wager that we have going on that you mentioned at the beginning of this.
Dr. McGuire, I would never want you to sell our committee and the public short until you're needing the information.
So far, I'm eating my words, so well done. So as it relates to the teaching and learning budget, you will notice some differences on the lines related to curricular resources and the assessment tools that are built into the teaching and learning budget. So first of all, you've heard me report out a few times this year on the Renaissance learning platform that we plan on bringing on into the district for next year. That's a cumulative student assessment data platform. We're piloting a variety of those assessments already this year. And so that comes at a one-year cost of $86,000. You're not going to see that reflected in the teaching and learning budget for next year because we're able to move that to the ESSER 3 grant, which is a 2-year grant that goes through next year. But that obviously is a teaching and learning curricular resource that we will continue to have moving forward So, but you will see that reflected in the ESSER 3 slide and in the ESSER 3 budget a little bit beyond this particular slide. As I've reported out several times this year as well, we've been in the curriculum review cycle for mathematics, and we currently have a variety of pilot curriculum work going on, K through 8. So we have budgeted 60,000. So you'll see the bump in that line for textbook adoption, because we'll make a decision on what curricular resource we want to use in our K through 8 mathematics programs. So that's really the biggest jump in terms of the teaching and learning budget for next year, and that comes on the textbook adoption line. Also, we want to put some money into our K through 5 history and social science resources. As you also know, the new frameworks for social studies, the 2018 frameworks came out a couple of years ago. We've been working on that in our 6 through 12 classrooms and across the 3 schools across the district. But we also now want to vertically align our K through 5 history and social science resources in alignment with those frameworks so that we're vertically aligned. So you'll see that money going towards the humanities and social science resources for our early learners. We're also piloting and looking at new STEM resources under the frameworks there. We've got some work to do in aligning our curriculum with the science frameworks. So we've put in $7,500 towards those STEM resources, as well as professional development for our middle school teachers, which is a need. And that we'll begin working on that. And then the other major change is what we did this year is move most of the curricular resources from our school-based budgets into the teaching and learning district budget. And we've done that really just for, clear alignment and the resources such as Big Ideas Math, our STEM Scopes curriculum for science, and then our early literacy and phonics curriculum foundations. We've moved that from the school budgets into the teaching and learning budget. So that's where you may see an increase in the teaching and learning budget, but you'll see a significant decrease in the school-based budgets for curriculum. And we really did that to house it in one place and make it a lot easier for ordering purposes and getting things streamlined across the district there. So you'll see the Big Ideas Math is at 19,500, our STEM Scopes at 6,000, and our Foundations program at 7,500 district-wide. And then here, I don't know if Superintendent wants to speak to just the dollar change here in the teaching and learning account. Thank you.
I do. Thank you, Dr. McGuire. So you're going to see there's some significant changes in these line items. These changes are here not because they are necessarily additions or subtractions. They've just shifted. So if you look at the teaching and learning administration, and these are salary lines of $199,000 in FY22, $257 in FY23. The increase there is simply a shift out of, we have pulled salary that was currently filed under our title grants in FY22 and shifted them into the FY23 budget. The rationale behind doing that is because whenever you put a MTRS eligible position into a federal grant, you have to budget 9% of that person's salary into the federal grant for obligations. So what ends up happening is the district pays on MTRS in 2 places. We still have to calculate for it in our budget, in our weekly salaries and paychecks that go out, but then we're required to turn over that reservation for federal requirements as well. So by bringing those positions into the budget and then shifting other costs that are not MTRS eligible into those entitlement grants, we're able to do that. So for instance, the district mentor program is, this is a line that's different. And I apologize to the committee. I discovered this as I was working on this just yesterday afternoon at about 1 o'clock. So you are not going to see this on the sheet. This is a good example of the sausage making is always going on in terms of the budget. This line in your sheet would say $40,000. And we're zeroing that out because we're shifting that to the Title IIA grant, which is the professional development coaching and mentoring grant. So by shifting the mentoring stipends into that, we won't be losing MTRS dollars, and that actualizes out to approximately $7,000 to $10,000 annually. The reduction in your sheet that you have now shows a number of 298. That was an error on my account in expressing one of our positions as a 1.0 position, when in fact it is currently funded as a 0.6 position. So luckily we caught that yesterday afternoon. So that line should read approximately 257,000. So we're making these updates in the master budget, and you will see that reflected in future runs of those documents.
And Kirk, just to be clear, MTRS, for anybody watching, is the Massachusetts Teacher Retirement System.
Yes. So I recognize also, Madam Chair, using these strategies in the scope of a $60 million budget, it's trimming around the margins. But in doing so, when you can effectively trim around the margins in places, you actually can come to a place where it can add up to some important decisions you got to make in your budget.
Okay, I think Amy has the question, but would you like her to wait just a little bit more until Todd is finished?
Yeah, let's go ahead and do the finish Todd section, and then we'll come to that.
Okay.
Perfect.
Dr.
Thank
McGuire?
you. Yeah. So ESSA is our title grants, titles 1, 2, 3, and 4. ESSA stands for the Every Student Succeeds Act. That's federal funding that we are entitled to each year. And so Title 1 monies are for the assistance and supports for our low achieving students. Title 2 fulfills supplemental resources to support excellence in teaching and learning. Title 3, which is an area that just this year we now qualify for, because for our English language learner population, our English language learner population continues to grow in the district. We've now hit the threshold where we are where money is available under that title for our district. And then Title 4 gives money for high quality and innovative resources for well-rounded education. So those are the 4 title grants that we work on pretty much all summer long once we get our allotments. So we work on that all summer long, and then we're able to put in our grant requests. This slide is expressed as this year's FY22 allotments that we were awarded. So we were awarded $146,018 in Title I, and that money goes towards programming at Mary Rowlandson and Luther Burbank in Lancaster for our Title I programming. We're also spending that money towards those new math assessments, as I mentioned, through Renaissance Learning this year, and that platform. It's giving us a lot of great information on that platform as we move forward. And that money also pays for our Title I teaching staff to support those lower achieving populations and our schools with them. So that's where that money is spent. Those monies that come through and those allotments every year are pretty standard, as Mrs. DeAngelis mentioned earlier in her presentation. You know, those monies shift a little bit, but they're pretty standard allotments year by year. Title II, we had $52,572 this year. That money was spent towards a lot of our professional development programming for our teachers and staff, resources to support that professional learning. And as Superintendent mentioned, we're also moving the mentor program under the Title II monies moving forward. Title III, as I mentioned, we were just eligible for this year. That was $15,000 to spend on resources to support our growing English language learner population. Our English language learner population and program continues to grow across the district. So that's what those resources are used for. And then Title IV, we received $10,000, and we've been using that towards, innovative technical resources to really support our high quality, innovative teaching and learning practices across the district. So we'll see these numbers similar next year, but those allotments don't come out until the spring, late spring, and then we work on applying for those grants during the summertime.
That is similar to the grants that Ms. DeAngelis spoke about as well. It's the same pattern of time. So I'll talk about the ESSA3 funding currently. ESSA3, we were funded at $831,000 this year. We have in the salary, this is our high school dean position, which is important, and I'm going to be talking about that shortly as well. It also is paying for the learning liaisons that we have placed into our schools, and then it's helped us fund Challenge Day, Lexia Learning, and Zoom as important activities this year. So with our remaining balance for next year, in talking with our principals, they advanced some positions forward. And these are the types of positions that we can pay with these funds. And I want to be clear, these are one-time funds. So putting long-term positions into this budget is not a good strategy, because then we have to be thinking about how we're going to fund them long-term. So in looking at that, you can see with assessment platforms and professional development, tying those in there has those costs, and as we build our budget and our strategies in future years, we can think about absorption of those. But really right now, as we continue to navigate a pandemic and the uncertain times of what we look like next year, where we have really been pressed up against it this year is when our teachers, our instructional assistants, and other staff members have been out, and our principals and our teachers have been just amazing in supporting and covering each other and going above and beyond their jobs to ensure the safety of all children and all coverages are provided. But I have to tell you, it does play a tax in terms of stress, in terms of morale over time when it's repeated. And that's the struggle that we're all existing in a pandemic. Our strategy for addressing that in the future is by equipping all of our schools with a building-based substitute that would go to wherever the school needs on that given day. That is a teacher credentialed substitute. As you know, it's been nearly impossible to find substitutes now. So if we secure them through a building-based strategy, that helps us be more predictable in the future. And the other is at the elementary levels, 2 for each of the 3 elementary schools, FSS K-5, is bringing in some lunch and recess monitors. This will take the burden off of teachers and IAs to covering lunches and recesses, particularly in socially distant moments, so that they can attend to the things they need. And the risk of then a student missing a service or an instructional component is greatly reduced, because we have people designated for those responsibilities in the spirit of safety and observation and supervision of children. So this is what we're looking for our ESSER 3 funding for next year. What I will tell you, particularly about the building-based substitutes and the lunch recess monitor positions, is this is how we're thinking about this today. Is it plausible that our strategy could shift or change in the future based upon the shifting sands of the pandemic? It may. This is where we feel today is the best way to spend these funds that are one-time funds. And these are not positions that we would anticipate funding in perpetuity. They are for next year, with this grant ending next year. And so before I get into the next section, we'll take any questions on the teaching and learning budget.
Go ahead, Amy.
Thank you. My question I have 2 questions, and it's one of the first slides that that Dr. McGuire presented. Can't see the slide number, but it's the one, curriculum, resources, and assessment tools. My first question has to do with the grades K-8 math curriculum resources. I thought I heard him say that these resources are under review, and the slide itself says post-pilot curriculum adoption. So I'm just wondering if that means that there might be a change from IXL to another program, because I don't see IXL listed there, and I know that that is a program we're using.
So Ms. Cohen, when we get to that point this year, after the review is done, we'll be doing a presentation to the school committee on changes in that curriculum.
Okay, thank you.
So we had to just budget for what, program will ultimately be selected. So we've gotten quotes from all of the different resources that we're looking at, so we could appropriately put that placeholder until we make that decision.
Okay, all right. It sounds like it's a work in process, which is what I wanted clarification on. And then the second question was, are high school curriculum resources and assessment tools addressed somewhere else? Because all of the, okay.
Yes, those are all specifically within the high school budget itself.
Okay, thank you.
And we've included that Renaissance that we're taking on to include grade 9 as well for a lot of the assessments that we're going to start at the high school. So that does include some of the high school as well.
Very good. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Any other questions?
Great. So as we walk through, I want to talk to you a little bit about a couple of the deliverables that I offered during my vetting process and early in the school year. One of those you've already seen, the onboarding of Renaissance Learning with the Schoolzilla platform, so that we are assessing our students in reading and mathematics and expressing it through the form of the data dashboard for our teachers to understand teaching and learning. So that's one deliverable that we're acting upon. The next is taking zero-based budgeting approaches to our budget development for non-salary items with our principals. And so what I did is sat down a couple of workshops with our principals and examining our budgets and 5 years of actuals to come up with what are the line items in our budgets that we can express on a per pupil basis, and then fund them based off of October 1 enrollment in an effort to ensure that we are providing equity in how we distribute funds across our schools. And so these are the items that we came together as a team that can be expressed as a per pupil expenditure in the budgets for the purpose of consistency. And so in doing that, you can see how that impacted the year-over-year budgets at each school. Mary Rowlandson, their budget actually increased 1.41%. Now, they asked for some other items that weren't expressed in the per pupil expenditures. Like, for instance, if you have contracted services because you need your 2 pianos tuned this year, but another school doesn't need the piano tuning, those are variables that happen school to school. So it's not going to be a perfect per pupil against one another. Each school has a different need in that regard. So you can see with Luther Burbank, there was a significant drop, a 44% drop. Well, remember, some of those expensive curriculum shifts came out of the schools and into the teaching and learning budget. When you look at Center School, the delta is a 21% decrease in non-salary, a 46% decrease of non-salary at Hale, 22% decrease at Florence Sawyer, and 11.48 decrease at our high school. I would like to share with you, and Mr. Eckel, we've had conversations around per pupil, so I've expressed non-salary expenditures on a per pupil basis for each of the schools. I at this point, you'll see there's a drastic difference in per pupil expenditures at the high school. 2 big reasons for that. The EMT program and the school resource officer are expressed in the high school budget, and so that is a significant expenditure that shifts the needle there. But also the materials at the high school are far more expensive than the materials at an elementary school. The cost of a paperclip, of course, is the same at all schools. But if we're equipping our art studio and photography classes with new Canon cameras, those expenditures, of course, are happening at the high school, not happening in other locations. So I use that as just a point of education of why the per pupil would look so much higher at the high school than others. It's simply the cost to educate at the high school is higher. And I think that's pretty universally understood. Now, what I will tell you is that as you aggregate all the schools together, what does that mean in terms of a delta? Well, we were able to decrease the non-salary expenditures at our schools by 18.85% to the tune of around $170,000 that I'll show. Now, using this approach, this is our first year in this approach. And so I'm asking our principals to make sure you attend to the bottom line of your budgets. But I want you to spend your dollars in the line items that they belong. So if you go over in a line item, that's okay as long as you don't expend over the bottom line of your budget. Because what we will do in our budget workshop late next fall with our principals is we'll look at our actuals and we'll begin to then make adjustments in our per pupil lines over time to tune those numbers. So this is our first pass at that. And I think with each year, we'll gain more and more accuracy in those per pupil expenditures based on our actuals in those line items. So what does this all mean? Well, using this methodology, shifting materials into the teaching and learning budget, we know we have an increase in the teaching and learning budget of $44,000 and non-salary decreases in the school budget of $176,000 over last year. That delta is $131,000, and you can think of that as an equivalency of 2 full-time equivalent educators in the system. So using this methodology, we were able to, as I said earlier, trim around the margins in order to budget what I think is a responsible methodology in budgeting that is based upon our actuals and what we're using. And it's also going to require us to look at what does our inventory look like within our schools, examine our inventory closely, and use that inventory as a priority. And so coming into that, new positions, I have 3 positions here, and I would like to note it's at a 0 increase to the budget due to allocation of current staffing. So at the opening of this presentation, we talked about enrollments and where we have places of declining enrollments and we have changing class sizes, and those variables continue to change throughout the year as you have move-ins and move-outs. As we examine that, we know we're going to have places where we are able to reduce FTE, and not at the cost of a teacher, because we have, I think at this point, up to 10 scheduled retirements coming in our school system. So with the reallocation of some of those FTEs that we know are in the school system, we will be able to fund a 0.5 special education moderate disabilities teacher at center school based upon the data of need at center school. We know we're going to increase the BCBA in our program at Florence Sawyer. This is a current position that is 0.4, and we're increasing it to 0.8. As well as coming out of COVID, we've had a significant increase in testing to evaluate for special education services. And so we're going to add a 0.5 increase in school psychologists for the district. But again, I can't emphasize enough, it is not going to be an additional cost to district. We are going to use our current staffing based upon some of the math methodologies you've seen in this presentation. So with that, Madam Chair, that's the conclusion of our presentation, and I would welcome any questions to wrap us up.
Fantastic. We have 8 minutes, a whole 8 minutes. Amy wants to go first. Go ahead, Amy.
Yeah, I just want to say that's an amazing accomplishment to get through that entire thing with time left. And I would just like to concur with all the other people who've spoken up on this. This was really a very rich presentation, and I really appreciate all of the visual aids displaying trends over the years. Very helpful. My question is really pretty mundane. What is BCBA? Could you please explain that?
Ms. DeAngelis?
It's a board certified behavioral analyst.
Board certified. Okay, thank you.
Joe.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. My question is to the superintendent. I'm going to harken way back to the beginning of his presentation and to a comment that I've been hearing quite a bit in our district for some time, and it pertains to our regional vocational high school. And the comment I've been hearing a lot of is that, the school may or may not be close to capacity. So my question is, and I'm asking the superintendent as an experience, both limited as it is with our district and perhaps even back at his former district in Natick in regards to the vocational technical school that served the Natick community. Vocational technical schools, by their nature, are permitted to propose and adopt an admissions policy. And my question is that in your experience, because I actually don't believe this, but when I hear a vocational technical school is at or near capacity, I never actually believe that. I find it hard to believe that any vocational technical school in this Commonwealth, based on the fact that they live and die by their recruitment, would ever deny admission to an otherwise eligible student. So in your experiences, regardless of population, have you ever had an experience where a student has been denied enrollment at a local vocational technical school based solely on capacity?
Yes,
Oh,
and
you
I do. Yeah, I have, and because one of the things that the vocational schools want to do is they want balance. So if you have, say, a community that is the preponderance of your population at the vocational school, and you don't from other towns, you fall the risk of being sort of subject to what the culture of that town is. And if that changes, your enrollment changes. It's almost like having a diverse portfolio, if you will. You want to be pulling from multiple towns and thinking proportionally there. So when I sat down with the superintendent earlier this year at a luncheon I was invited to, we discussed that. I'm going to follow up with him to find out what that looks like currently. But they are looking at how they can distribute, because they're getting requests from some of their towns that have less enrollment to bring more students. And they are saying that they are getting to a point where they're developing a wait list.
Karen.
I'm just looking for a little clarification on the new positions. So there's 3 new positions for next year, all of them related to special education. So 0 increase in budget due to reallocation of current staffing. So I feel like I'm just missing it. I'm not connecting the dots correctly. So is this that some staff is being reallocated to where this need is greater in the district, or is this because some people are retiring and salaries will be changing, that these are to be folded in and hired as new to the district without impacting the budget?
Yes, I hear your question, Ms. Devine. It is FTE. It is not dollars. So in terms of a full-time equivalency, and I'll give you a really, really simple example. Right now, we are tracking in Lancaster to have 3 sections of kindergarten.
Mm-hmm.
In the budget, we have 4 sections planned. So as we carefully watch that number, it's looking pretty strong that it's going to be 3 sections of kindergarten at Lancaster. Well, if in the budget it's 4 sections, we wouldn't need that position. Thus, it's available to pay for these others.
Okay, thank you.
So that's the most simple example, but there's other places where we can look as well.
Okay, thanks.
Kirk, I have a quick question, and it's going back to that important slide called budget drivers. Sorry, getting there. It seems to me that the increase in our budget is resting solely on existing personnel, insurance, and benefits. And so that large increase that we're seeing, the $4.2 million increase, is largely just to pay for the cost of living increase and steps and lanes and their benefits of our professional staff. Would you say that that's accurate?
That's 100% accurate. And we know that that number is going to shift and change over the course of the term.
And so you've been able to kind of pay for everything else in other creative ways?
Yes.
Fantastic.
So that really brings us to a place of looking at our salary and those other drivers as the real places where we can look around the margins on our budget and look at significant chunks where needed.
I will end my comment by saying, well done, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Go ahead, Rich.
I had a question. Forgive me if you already mentioned this. I may have missed it, but it's worth noting how large the inflation number is this year. Did you mention that impact on the budget? I think you had told me at some point it's 5.71 this year.
Yeah, it is. And Mr. Eckel, I anticipate we will be discussing that even more in budget and warrant as well. But yes, we've adjusted for that. One example you see is in the fuel costs and facilities that, for example, inflation is expressed there. So in terms of the non-salary items, we're going to use our strategy and our expenditures this coming year specific to those line items to tell us where those specifics are.
Any other questions as we have 2 minutes here? I think the win is going to Kirk right now, Dr. McGuire.
Let's get that motion to adjourn in there then, Madam Beverito.
TikTok.
I will move to adjourn.
Second.
Amy has seconded. Let's go around and take the roll. I say yes. Joe.
Yes.
Sharon. Yes. Karen.
Yes.
Mary.
Yes.
Rich.
Dr. McGuire, should I hold out a couple minutes?
Please do.
Yes.
Sean,
Yes.
Brett,
Yes.
Amy,
Yes.
Steve,
Yes.
and Mike.
Yes.
I say 10:59. We are adjourned.
Madam Chair,